came in, he was a bag of bones, he was just, like this and squirmy, wormy, and kind of all over the place. And it was a project.
What I've enjoyed about all of our gym sessions over the years is everything is correlated and aimed towards what we're going to do on the water. It's like preparation for the water.
It's one of those sports that is really unique in that we only get to practice our big wave surfing sport, 6 times a year.
I would say throughout the whole winter, I treat it as this could be the last swell.
All right, Scott, thanks for coming in today.
Yeah.
For those of you that don't know, Scott is our coach. We probably spend more time with you than pretty much everybody except for our family. Every day, sometimes 5 days a week. This time of year during the season, more like 3 days. But and you've been training Kai since he was, 11 years old?
12, I think.
12, yeah, and me for the past 4 years. So yeah, we really appreciate all the coaching you gave us and definitely have molded us into what we are today for sure. So yeah, welcome on Lenny Bros.
Right on. Thank you.
Yeah. So I guess a cool place to start. I mean, you have such a interesting history and you weren't always just a coach, you were an athlete yourself. So maybe take us back to what you did back then. You had a really interesting road to becoming an athlete. So yeah, tell us about that a little bit.
Right.
That'd be cool.
So I came from starting skiing at 4 years old and then going into the mountains back in New England and then leaving home at 12 and kind of getting on my own program. I wasn't the best in academics. I wasn't the best in the skiing, but I had the work ethic and that propelled me in a lot of different directions. And then my family was from Bolivia. So I started ski racing with a U.S. license and then I changed because it opened up a lot of opportunities. Pissed off a lot of people because I got a starting position that I otherwise wouldn't get. But what it did for me in the long term was I was kind of a late bloomer and I had personal bests as I got older and older. And part of the things that really made my coaching the way it is that I got to train with all different teams, meaning Italian team, Spanish team, German team, Swiss team, and every team had a different approach, and I was no threat to them. And in the sense that I wasn't taking from them, I was just kind of going along, and they'd let me in on their training courses, and then I learned to speak a lot of different languages as a result of that, and traveling on my own, and just getting things done. And if you're in a system and you get to be exposed to all the different kind of coaching approaches. Some people use a lot of humor. A lot of people are really all about detail, and every athlete is different. And as a result of working with so many different coaches, it really gave me insight into, okay, you can't have one program for everybody. And being able to adjust, just like with you guys. I mean, there's, you and I, Ridge and I can have a long conversation, and Kai does really well in sound bites, because it's just, there's a really high intensity and the information gets digested and implemented right away. And you like to know the process and how to get there, even though Ridge is on the emergency improvement program the whole time.
Yeah, we'll get more into all that and the dynamics. Is I feel like we are very different in the way that we take in information and take coaching. So that'll be interesting to get to. But before we do this, so you're in skiing and have a career doing that. Well, how did you transition into then realizing you found a talent for coaching?
Right.
When did that sort of happen, or what was that
happened?
Like?
The transition from being a competitive athlete to coaching. Basically, I got an invite to say, "Hey, I'm still competing. Hey, would you be interested in working with somebody?" And I'm like, "Yeah, okay." And from there, that's how it basically started. Just short mini camps kind of thing. And while I was still competing, and it helped fund me, so I got good compensation for it. And then I transitioned into getting offered a position creating a ski academy, which is basically a high school for kids to go to school in the morning and then go skiing in the afternoon. And I did that for a couple of years, and then I went on to work with the Europa Cup with the U.S. team. Then I was a private coach for a U.S. racer, and then I was a private coach for a Japanese racer. And then I ran the Japanese team for 10 years, and then I took positions where I was like kind of like emergency improvement coach for somebody that had been really good or got injured or something happened to them. And I could do all of the things, whether it was the motor skills, the conditioning, the learning how to compete, getting them back, if somebody had an injury or something like that. So I did a few years of that. And then we got into the water sports because I met my wife, Rhonda.
Okay. Yeah. That's another interesting transition in your life. But before we go into that, so you were focusing on the downhill skiing, right? Which is, to me, looks like the scariest discipline by far. I mean, just how fast are you going down, like 70 miles an hour?
We're it's kind of like you guys going at Jaws, and it's really bumpy. And, from the guys on the cliff, they're like, oh, I don't know, that doesn't look too hard, I mean, it looks really impressive, but when you're riding on it, it's just like this. And going 70 miles an hour on ice with fall away turns is totally different than going on groomed snow going 80 miles an hour.
Right.
You could go 60 miles an hour and it seems like you're going 160, just because when you're going that fast and it's icy, your vision is, like when you guys see the guys in the sim doing the stuff Kai, you experienced it doing the Formula One sim. It's really hard. Well, that's the same thing in skiing and downhill, Super G, giant slalom. The Super G and the downhill are the most intense that way. And then when you get into bad weather, you can't see. And when you can't see, everything kind of climbs up like this, and you have to work really hard to go everything by feel.
Yeah, that discipline, it seems like there's so much of a mental aspect of it, because I feel like it's one of those things where you can't necessarily be presently really thinking about everything. It's almost like you have to go into that, what they call a flow state, and you have to be reacting really quickly because you're going so fast. And like you said, you have to make these really minute, adjustments that should have to come kind of really naturally. You can't be like, oh, I'm going to place my ski. I mean, I don't know anything about skiing, but that's what it looks like to me, which is, I feel like as you're developing as a coach, that is like the holy grail, is how to get your athlete into the flow state. And that's what I'm super interested in learning about, is how do you get into that mindset?
Right. So everything comes down to confidence, and confidence is gained and built on preparation. And without that progression of preparation, it's really difficult to get in the starting gate, to get behind the wheel, to get on one of the waves that you guys are riding, and just go, oh boy, how am I going to handle this? But it's everything in progression. And sometimes you have to be over that line in a really healthy way to get that wisdom to know that you can do it. Just was a few weeks ago with Otis, he had a pretty big go down, and now he knows that he can come back,
Right.
And when in the ski racing itself, there's, for downhill, there's inspection, meaning that you can side slip the entire course, you hike back up a little bit, you're looking for little intricacies, over a roll, I can see the top of that pine tree, and you remember every terrain change in it. And it's constantly changing. And you guys have the exact same thing in the wave. You get on the wave, it's going to wrap, it's going to do this. And that's because you're so familiar. And when you go to a new place, you got an emergency improvement program, and you're trying to have it at the least amount of your own personal cost, meaning that you want to make a new mistake. And so the more information that you can gain from either watching and inspecting and looking, okay, what does it look like underneath? Where's the reef? Where does it stop? And all those sort of things. So inspection comes, and then you have training runs. And then the training runs, you're allowed to kind of make some adjustments. There's timing, different sections. Not everybody shows all their cards. They might show all their cards in two sections where they do it. Okay, this is a second training run. Weather's coming in bad. I'm going to drop the hammer in these two sections. And after that, I'm just going to put the parachute out. Nobody's going to really know where I am. As far as overall time. So
are the different competitors were looking at each other's lines?
Yes.
And really?
Yeah. So you're always studying the video, because the video, we always talk about closing the gap between fact and feeling and fact.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you feel like, the gate is here and you feel like you're set up at this angle, and your skis are here. And the fact is you're over here and your skis are there. And then you have to make a much bigger turn at the bottom.
Yeah, I mean that makes a ton of sense, and I've noticed the same thing. Surfing, I feel like even more so, because you can't go around that same turn over and over again, and it's so hard to. You think your body's doing a certain thing, and you can tell us, oh, you have to rotate your hips more, and then I think I'm doing it, and then I see the video and it looks the exact same, and you have to almost overcompensate so much for how it should feel,
right,
for it to actually make a difference. But yeah, the video is critical. And I mean, Kai has always professed that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that's really important is to create conditions that allow you to get that feedback to show the weakness or the strength. So, you have controlled environments like a pool where you can train in a pool that allows you to have a repetitive turn because you can set the wave up to be exactly the same. Mm-hmm. And then you can have a really accurate feedback loop. Whereas like for the toe windsurfing, here and where we're chasing big waves all around the world, the window is so short, and you could kind of think of it the same way the Formula One guys. If you think about how much hours they actually have in the race car compared to the sim, it's like, how can you possibly expect excellence? But that's just the nature of the cost of everything and how it works. And so when you use a pool, which we would call a controlled environment, sort of like a basketball court, it's fixed, it never changes. It's the same surface wherever you go. And with what we're doing in the water sports, it's always changing. So that's why the volume of repetition is so important, to be able to control and try things in and have that instant feedback loop.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And speaking of, so we're getting into the water sports stuff now. Let's talk about your transition into your Olympic ski coach, top of the world in that world. And then how do you end up coaching windsurfing world champions it seems like a few years later?
Right.
It seems very opposite sort of environments to find yourself in.
Well, it started, I was in San Francisco, and I saw Dmitry Milovich and Ken Winter in Berkeley, and they were testing a wing mast, and it had this huge wing on it. And then I heard there was a World Cup in the Bay, and then I went to Waddell Creek and I watched that, and I'm like, I got to learn how to do that, because I was at the end of my career, basically 1984. I did the Olympics, did the spring, and it was that, I think it was late spring or maybe even early fall. And then I got into windsurfing. I liked it. And then I met my now wife in 85, and she was a many-time world champion as a windsurfer. And then the sport evolved. It changed. It went from long boards with dagger boards and all kinds of things, and the sport really evolved. And I remember walking up to her and just asking her, do you want to win again? And that's how our relationship was built on. Everything, the results were the priority, not the relationship. And as a result of that happening, the result was the priority. The relationship was the priority because it was so important.
Yeah. Oh man, that's awesome. And then, go ahead.
So from watching the sport, starting to do it, then meeting Rhonda, and then just being around the best guys in the world, it was like a fast track to improving. And I could see all the opportunities to learn for myself selfishly, and also to help her. I was like, Rob said, I don't trade. What are you talking about? And then Phil McGain, he was a really straight out guy for practice and stuff. And he became obsessed with testing. And so you had two bipolar, completely different characters that were exposed to it. And as a result of that, I got involved training other athletes outside of Rhonda as well, that were guys on the PBA at the time. And then it came PWA Tour. And then I actually started a junior team in between when I was coaching the national teams that was in the summer. And a lot of those kids came from Aruba, Curacao, just all over the place, Maui, and they'd spend the summer. And at that time, windsurf racing and windsurf wave sailing and all those kinds was really popular. So there was tons of opportunities. So I did that, and a lot of those guys went on to compete at the World Cup as well.
So that was like the formation of Team MPG?
Yes.
Yeah. That's sick.
So what happened was I was running the national team, and I got a call when I was in Sestriere at the World Championships, and I was sliding down the hill. It was a night race, and it was Micah, and he said, "Hey, would you ever be interested in coming and doing a camp with me?" I'm like, "Okay." And Micah had been Micah Bazinas. He was on my junior team as a kid, and I was like, "Okay." So I came. I stayed at his house. We were there a few weeks, and I think he finished second or third in Almanar after that. And he said, "Could you come again?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." And so that's how it got started. And then it was at a point where when I was finishing with the national team, everything is done in sort of 4-year and 8-year and 10-year cycles, depending upon world championships. And I had the opportunity to cross over and just say, well, it's time to do something different. Because the opportunities that were presented to me in the ski racing world, the budget didn't allow them to hire me. And I was just like, nah, I'm not interested in rebuilding an entire group, because I did that for 10 years. I want to go back to being on top and just having some rebuilds and some adjustments. And it's really about athlete management and making sure we have the best preparation and knowing which button to press on each one of those athletes. It could have been, there was an era where I was working together with two really well-known female athletes. One was Peekaboo Street and one was Hillary Lind, and two diabolically different characters and personalities and paradigms about how they operated. But I could have really good conversations with both of them. And that was a gift that I think I really acquired as a result of being with all those different teams as a competitor and learning, everybody marches to a different beat.
Yeah, it seems like the coaching thing is not, I mean, obviously the technical side of things, the technique, the lifting weights is important, but it's so much of it is a psychological approach.
Yeah, you have to be able to resonate with the individual that you're working with, and you have to get into a language that resonates with them.
Yeah.
And, your delivery is more important than the information at that point, because you could be telling somebody all the right things, but if you don't deliver it in such a way that it inspires them, motivates them, they're not going to implement it.
Yeah.
And so knowing how to do that just comes from being around so many different people.
Yeah.
So, sometimes I could be yakety, chackety, chackety, check, and other times it's just like, fewer words are much more powerful.
So have you seen it in your career where you're looking for maybe developing talent, and there's one guy or a kid, say, that has all the talent but is kind of closed-minded and hard-headed, and you have one that maybe doesn't have the talent but they're a hard worker and they're willing to listen and implement? Is the one that's a hard worker, I would imagine, is the one that's in the end is going to be more successful, or is it a bit of both, you think?
I think it's a bit of both, but there's been athletes that have come in and said, okay, as an example, Francisco was a world champion, and I had this guy coming in that basically said, if you can make him a world champion, I'll train with you. And I was like, I don't need you, but okay.
And that was Francisco Goya?
That was Francisco Goya. And then when he came to have a sit down with me, he, I said, okay, these are the things I need to suggest that we make some adjustment with. No, I got that. No, I got that. And I said, sounds like you don't need me at all. I don't know where you even came down. You got it all figured out. You're going to win the next world title, but I'll be competing with you, And so, yeah, it's not for everybody,
Yeah. No,
especially in a sport that was, for lack of a better word, inexperienced with having coaching.
Yeah.
Everybody kind of did it on their own,
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And so, I was going to bring up Francisco Goya because I think that is one of your star pupils over the years. Someone that, I mean, just from the stories I've heard, especially from, I was just on a trip with Lalo, his brother, and he was telling me about the impact that you made and the complete 180 he did. And I'd imagine after, coaching him and turning him into the competitive powerhouse he was, I bet your phone was ringing off the hook with the other windsurfers wanting the same sort of information. Did that happen?
We did pretty well. I think there was a point where we had 26 out of the top 30 guys that were training, not full time, but they'd come in and they'd stay 5 or 6 weeks, and it was conditioning training, and I could do some feedback, but really, to win a world title, you have to be committed. It can't just be, well, let's go and slam some steel and do that in 3 weeks. It's just going to fix it like that. It doesn't work like that. Francisco is a Cinderella story. He when I first met him, He was very soft-spoken, and just, okay, what are we going to do? How's it going to be? And that's not really me. I'm a little bit like, let's giddy up and go kind of thing. And then, but he was absolutely, what do you want me to do? And we'd do it. And so I didn't want to change a lot as we started because we were starting towards the end of the season. I think I came over in September, October for him. I can't really remember. And then as soon as the season completed, then I basically kind of did a little dissection, and he could come to the beach and be all jazzed, and somebody could say something to him that would knock him off his horse. And I could name 10 names that would happen instantly. And then he starts second guessing himself. And so that's where your confidence comes from preparation. And we were together 6 days a week, 8 hours a day.
Wow.
Yeah. Whether it was skateboarding, whether it was on the beach, whether it was watching videos, that's just the commitment that we had. And basically I think it was in February, after we got through the end of the season, we started doing some fundamental stuff for his technique and things. And then I said, okay, it's time to learn how to compete. He's like, okay, what are we going to do? So it's kind of a personal story, but I've told it a few times, and I know that he came out on top, so I think he'd be okay with it. But the fact is that he didn't know how to compete. So we went to Waihu, which is a beach away from everybody, on shore. And I said, okay, go out, do your warm up. And I want to see this. I want to see that, do this. And there's nobody there. It was just us. And I kind of set the stage. I said, okay, I want you to close your eyes. And I want you to imagine we're in Silt. There's, 70,000 people. You have a coach that you're paying out of your contracts. And I kind of built it up like this is a really risky thing to do. And there's a lot of expectations, and you're breaking all the barriers, and you're doing all this stuff. And I can't honestly remember, but I'm going to say, I said, okay, now you're going to go against Nick Baker. And he's a clockwork kind of guy, and he'll be joking fast track, but he's always on it, and he'll know which button to press to piss somebody off or to knock them off their horse. And I know he can do that. He could have done that to Francisco. And I said, this is what he's going to do, and now you have to match it. And I said, you have a 3-minute transition and like an 18-minute heat or something like that. So he goes out, complete disaster. Just came, it was like he could hardly even tack, jibe, whatever. It was just a disaster. And he came back in, he threw his gear on the beach, extremely upset, and I'm laughing. And, extremely upset. And then there was a long lineage of familia and all this kind of stuff. And it was this and it was that. And we got through that. And I go, the power of your imagination is so strong. Do you see any Germans here? Mm-hmm. Is there anybody with a contract here? Is there anybody from Arrows here? Just went on. And we just kind of dissected the whole thing. I said, your imagination is so strong. All I have to do is give you the right information. And then you're going to be having personal excellence, which is good enough to win. And that's how we did it. And we did all kinds of things. And Kai experienced some of the stuff, just being in his ear, just hammering him about really personal stuff and just chatter and just stupid stuff that can really be distracting. But when the brain gets used to it and callous to it and knows how to compartmentalize and where to put it and use that, and now you take that energy and you put it back into a different direction to make it productive, it's just awesome power. And so he went on to win, and he won the world title. And I remember Bjorn came up to him at the end. He said, we could have had 27 events and you still would have won.
Wow.
So it was pretty amazing.
That's crazy. And
we did stuff like he was very particular, just like Kai's very particular. And what here, it's got to be there. I carry the board like this, do this. And I have no problem. I totally understand. I want the same thing. But as soon as I go, you ready? Yep. And I friggin' just loosen the downhaul, move the track. I go, deal with it. It's going to happen. You got to understand, it's the pilot. You can make this happen. And I made him go out on a production board on a 5.8, I think at the time, and drove all the way out to the buoy at Waihu. And that's like a mile out there. And then he had to do forwards coming in on each tack, 2 forwards and jibe, 2 forwards and jibe. And we ended up doing forwards in Pozo coming in, and nobody else was doing it. You know, I mean, he was just really committed.
Yeah, that's such a cool story. And then I want to get to the segment of your coaching career, which is now has been a huge part of your overall coaching career, and that's coaching this guy. What was it like when, I'm assuming, my dad approached you and he's like, can you coach my kid? And there's this little, tiny 11-year-old kid that is wanting to coach. Were you a little apprehensive at first? And then I want to get Kai's reaction to what it was like having a coach at that age too, 'cause I'm so curious. I've never seen anything like that.
No, I think he came in, he was a bag of bones, he was just, like this and squirmy, wormy and kind of all over the place. And it was a project. And I knew from Rob that he was like, hey, this kid's going to be good.
Robbie Nash.
Yeah. And like, this kid's going to be good, because we were really, really good. We were good friends when he was on the tour, and he was good friends around. I kind of grew up with a bunch of those guys. So I had some insight. And then, after one workout, it was obvious that he was really energetic and had fun. And that's a great person to work with. You get some kids that are really quiet and and you just trying to figure out which button to press.
Do you even remember your first sessions?
Walking into the gym with your dad, I remember saying.
Oh, I remember. I think the first time was actually we were doing the Maui race series at the time, and I had just maybe gotten a custom windsurf sail from Nash. And it was, I think we were doing a course racing division that weekend, so that's like doing the upwind segment and then the downwind segment. But I just remember going to see you because my dad was like, oh, we should go see Scott because he has these pulleys and you put them on the back of the boom and you string a line and then you can adjust the way the sail is tuned while you're sailing. Because if you're going upwind, you want more power, or or actually you might like tighten it up so you can like pinch upwind, and then on the way down you might open it up to kind of create a big baggy sail to go downwind. So Scott helped me tune up one of my booms that was like now dedicated for that. But I remember after that, when I started training with him, it was like, I think it was a discipline thing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was like 5:30 in the morning wake ups, which I think at like 12 is like,
are you crazy?
Well, you're just, nowadays it's like, oh yeah, like I'll work out at 5. Like that sounds great. But when you're 12 years old and you're probably still growing, and but luckily I was just down the street, so it was pretty easy just to walk down to your house. And so that was like, I just remember that distinctly. I almost miss it because then when you're done with a workout, you already got a big part of your day over with. Now my 5:30 wake ups is for 2 toddlers, but that was my earliest fondest memories. And it was cool because at the time you had world champion windsurfers particularly, or skiing World Cup champions or Olympic champions, kind of a lot of different athletes coming in and out of the gym. So it was like, who's coming in today? And you'd see how they would work out. And no, it was really cool. It was like, it left an indelible mark, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's such an interesting environment. Like I can't imagine like today, us being how old we are now and then having like a 12-year-old kid in there.
Right.
It's such an interesting concept.
Well, I think what it does, what you see is you see a timeline of history just like ready to unfold if you've got the right ingredients. And there's been a lot of interest and things like that, but I haven't sunk my teeth into anybody else.
We still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, we're not done with us yet. Yeah. Yeah, and so I guess so. You guys, your relationship started mainly windsurfing, correct?
Yeah, I would say it was like based in windsurfing, and that was like my focus. And then it shifted, I'd say, more to stand-up paddling, which I think it's kind of interesting how each sport is derived from, say, surfing, but at the same time, how through these different miniature eras, how the workouts have really been different and how we've approached it. Yeah. So like, I don't know, Scott, maybe you want to just fill us in on like, how is it different training for windsurfing versus, my era in stand-up paddle racing and surfing. Right. And then, I'd say now it's like particularly centered around big wave surfing.
So the different approaches for all of the sports are going to be, you want to have movement patterns that mimic what you're doing. You want to have loads that mimic what you're going to experience, whether it's like in big wave surfing, we do a lot of eccentric, you coming down and you hit a bump, you've got to be able to stay stable, because if you collapse, you're a pancake. You got to be able to hold that eccentric load. For stand-up racing, you got to be, you're in anaerobic state almost the whole time, for these sprint races and long distance races. And I remember Kai and I went to Chicago, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is really something, because it was piano. It was so flat. And you tried to hook on and draft. You tried to get behind there, and just, there were certain rules on distances and everything, but it was really different. And so we had to adjust the endurance type thing and how to do that and getting to that anaerobic state. And when Kai was really young, I think it was maybe 12, 13, when we went to Red Bull for the testing.
Oh, yeah, that's a great story. Is when we did, it's called the Red Bull DTC, and it's like, I don't know, diagnostics.
Testing center, yeah.
Testing center. And I think, I might have been 13.
Yeah.
But that was crazy because it was all the way in Austria, and it felt like a world away. And correct me if I'm wrong, after that, we went to Sylt, Germany, right after, which is, I still probably think the biggest single windsurfing event in the world. It's located on this island, Sylt, off of Germany. But tell us about that trip.
So the diagnostic testing center, it was pretty cool, because you run into this the brick building on a creek, and there's no sign of anything that says Red Bull except for a little tiny tag. And you get inside, and there's this whole center, and there's all kinds of the latest and greatest equipment to quantify, everything from your psyche to your physical conditioning. Blood was tested morning, every single morning, and this way, not in the ear. And then when we did the exercises and the testing, he did extremely well. And they were very surprised at his ability to handle discomfort. And it
was one of the most miserable experiences up to that point.
That does sound miserable.
Well, it's just like push to failure, which I guess people are a little more used to seeing now. But felt like at the time it just seemed so foreign, because no social media, no internet, magazines, videos, but you never got to see like maybe the inner workings of training. I felt like Red Bull was quite a bit of a pioneer in like allowing or pushing athletes to train in that way in our type of sports. I'm sure like it's been going on, with, the bigger winter sports or motorsports or whatever for a lot longer. But for like the niche water sports, like windsurfing and stuff, like, I mean, it's all stuff you brought to the table, but this was like all of a sudden, I have to do well to impress Red Bull. And remember, we ended up giving car rides to a future MotoGP racer. And so it was like a very contrasting thing. He might have been, I don't, if you can remember, 15 or 16.
Yeah.
And it was just really interesting to get his take on, training and stuff. But that was like push to failure. It was like the VO2 max thing, what people sometimes do where they try to go beyond and throw up in a bucket or whatever. And I just think I was having a lot of night terrors at the time too, because just pushing to beyond exhaustion.
Yeah.
And it was very stressful. It was like in Europe, and it was probably I think my second trip ever to Europe, first time without maybe my parents there. And so it was like, it's really intense. So I could just remember that trip being like, I just don't want to go back. Nowadays it's like, oh yeah, I could go back every year. Like that sounds pretty fun. So different when you grow up and you forget that. But the time I was so scared we had to go back the next year. And so I was like, did not want to go back.
Well, I think Red Bull being such an innovative company, and, you might look at it like, we got an invitation to go to the testing center, and we're going to take probably the youngest athlete that they've ever had. And coming from this bizarre sport compared to MotoGP and these other really common sports and well-known sports, they were probably like, well, let's see how fast we can cast this one out, and just say, I told you, they're a bunch of donkeys,
Well, remember the doctor was super scary. Do you remember his name?
No. No, I can't remember. I remembered a long time.
Was he German or Russian? I couldn't.
I think he had come out of the Eastern Bloc, so he was East German, I think.
Yeah.
And
he was scary for sure. For like a 12-year-old or 13-year-old or whatever. It was like,
we sat down at this conference table, and then
to go over everything, right?
Yeah. So we had physical testing, and then he got his blood tested all the time. And the physical testing was, there was bike things, there was power stuff, there was some lifting, coordination stuff. Then there was sit in the room and, these different pursuit things for how long you can stay in the moment, basically, like get in that flow state and do it.
Yeah.
And they set those things up usually like, this is going to tell us how good you are at competing. I mean, they kind of really do that to see, trying to get you anxious.
Anxiousness.
Yeah, get and see how you perform with anxiety. And he was like a rock, and they were like, well, let's turn it up a little bit. I know this guy because they were speaking German and I could speak German, and we sat at the table. Not until we sat at the table, and then when we sat at the table, they were talking among themselves, and I basically said it doesn't make any difference to me. You want to speak German and want English, and they're like,
"Oh, you heard it the whole time."
And the spiele keine Rolle für mich. And they were like, "Oh, did we say anything wrong?"
They were just talking about wanting to torture him more.
I was like, I don't know, this kid. I think he's pretty good, but I don't know. We got to push a little bit more.
No, and then I remember the guy, the doctor, when it was you left the room or you weren't even in the room yet, and he looks at the papers for like 5 minutes, and then he looks up and he's like, "You're pretty good." And that's like, everyone was like, "Whoa, he said that to you?" Like in the whole facility, like he said, "You're pretty good." He doesn't say that to anyone. Right. And I was like, and I'm used to like coming from my parents who are very loving and kind, and maybe like a real familia, kind of nuclear family. So to me, I was like, that was like, wow, I did terrible. I felt like I did terrible.
You felt terrible.
I felt terrible. You feel like you do terrible, especially at that age when you lack experience and, doing anything to failure. You always end up in failure because it's like you go until you can't go anymore.
Right.
And so at the time you're like, was it good? Wasn't it good? And nothing to go by, no stats. Like,
right.
There's just no barometer. There's no one to even compete with because the youngest kid was MotoGP kid, but he was like
15, maybe almost 16.
Yeah, and he was probably going through like Moto3 or whatever, or wanting to go into that realm. And I just remember it just seemed like we were on a completely different program, but at the same time we were like working out together.
Yeah. That trip really highlighted Kai's his strength in all different things. The ability to go to complete exhaustion and total failure, because a lot of people will, and even professional athletes get to a certain point and they're like, that's it, I can't do anymore.
Yeah.
And you know that there's still more in the tank, but it's the pain and it's only momentary, but it feels like it's going to be forever. And then you put it in neutral, and then it's like, oh man. And you miss that opportunity of being able to get over that next level of excellence,
Yeah, I feel like the stand-up paddle racing was like the most literal manifestation of that. I mean, you could see the big wave stuff, it's the marathon sessions and stuff, but you can't win one of those long distance races unless you just torture yourself. Like the training,
it's to failure, really. Those races are just till utter exhaustion, like shaking afterwards. Like, I think the most painful thing I've ever done was all the stand-up paddle racing, for sure, because it's sustained. It's a long time. Like big waves, I think the scariest thing has always been the wave itself. That's like the fear factors, the wave, the impact. But as far as like physicality in big waves, coming from stand-up racing, it was easy.
Well, it's more like sprinting versus
sprinting, but even getting throttled underwater, it's not like I'm tired underwater. It's just the fear of not coming up. I mean, it's one thing to get pounded with an inflation vest for sure versus without, but I think the stand-up paddle race training that we were doing was by far the best thing that one could possibly do for big waves. Like the pool training, holding your breath, that's great, whatever. It's kind of just a confidence booster more than anything, but like going to the harbor and doing laps in the harbor,
sprints along the wall,
and you do it till you're just like, you have bags under your eyes and you're just like so exhausted. And the idea of doing that 4 times a week, like in the work week, was just like, it was so daunting because you're just like, oh my gosh, this is like an hour and a half, 2 hours of just constant.
And that was on top of the training too.
Well, that was on top of the
you guys
gym
did that.
training. And then it was a morning session and an afternoon usually. But there was like, the cool thing is there was it was so new and there was so much life to it. It felt like it was worth it.
Right.
You know, I feel like sports now maybe on a psychological part, like how do you get yourself to push that far, like to make it seem worth it? Like you don't want to, I mean, it's fun when you're in the rhythm and you do all the training and you know the satisfaction of winning and stuff, but it felt like it really mattered. And that made it easy to kind of train because you're like, well, it could be going to the Olympics. There was this, remember, there was this one event called the Battle of the Paddle, and it was always right after Silt, Germany. And so I was going from a windsurf event straight to that one. And that was like a massive, massive event. It was like not maybe as big, but close, but it was in the United States. And it just was like, it was just a mountain to climb, you know? Yeah. And I don't know if even in our landscape of sports, you really got to love what you're doing in order to, I think, dig in that much because everything's kind of like tamed down a lot.
Yeah. Right. I remember going to the harbor with you a few times and getting there at dawn. You're dawn patrolling the smelly harbor. It's like 30 knots of wind, and we paddle into the wind and do these huge laps. It was like, I think right then and there, I was like, this sport's not for me. I don't want it. I don't want it bad enough to be doing this every day.
You forget how bad it hurts because last summer I was considering doing the Molokai to Oahu. We talked about this. Yep. I was like, okay, foil Molokai to Oahu and then do SUP across the next weekend because they're 2 weekends apart. And I ended up not going because we went to Indo for a really good swell. And I was already pretty tired of like training or whatever, but I went on the 1711, which was when we won the 2016 Molokai to Oahu big SUP. Yep. And it was to do 5 miles just to my house versus a foil was so physically taxing, like unbelievable. Like I was like, I need like 2 months of paddling on this thing. Cause like nothing, cause you're so much drag of the surface of the water. And it was just gnarly. And it just, all those moments came flooding back in my head. I'm like, this was literal torture. Like, there was probably a time where I was like, oh, I cannot wait for this part of my career to be over. And just pure wave riding. It made, like I said, going into big waves seem easy. Granted, the fear factor of the wave itself was like a whole nother mountain to climb, but the physicality, oh gosh, like there's one thing I could do just for big waves. If I could do nothing else, it'd be go do laps in the harbor.
But the great thing is that all of these different water sports, they complement each other. And that's probably, Kai's biggest strength is that his kiting can help his surfing, and the surfing can help his foiling, and the foiling can help his windsurfing. And just having that appetite and that confidence to know that you're actually being really productive with what you're doing versus just like, oh, I'm just doing this for something else,
Yeah.
But it's always helping, you're as soon as you change, you're on one sport and you change and you try and bring a little bit of that into the other sport. It's like, I've got something. All right, I know what I need to do. And everything from now, with Kai designing and building his own equipment as well, it just has an incredible profit margin.
Yeah, I remember just when I was thinking about starting to go to Jaws, everyone's talking about the speed and the chop, and you're going so fast. And then I remember the first waves I got, it was like, oh, feels a lot like windsurfing. The sensation of skipping over the water, and it was like a comfortability was there. So that's so true. I feel like if I grew up just surfing alone, it would have been a lot scarier, a lot big of a learning curve getting up to those speeds. But yeah, I want to talk about, I know a lot of people are really interested in how we train for big waves because it is big wave surfing. We talk about this a lot, but it's one of those sports that is really unique in that we only get to practice our big wave surfing sport, 6 times a year, right. 6 to 10 times a year, whatever. That's very small compared to any other sport. So the training, it's not like you can just go and practice and go up to Jaws tomorrow and get a session in. So how do you kind of think about that and preparing us for those types of days? because there's so few,
So I think, again, it just comes back to the fundamentals of preparation and confidence. And, that confidence is going to be built from your conditioning training, video reviewing, testing equipment, mimicking different loads, changing the picture. A lot of times, we do what I call contrast training, which is where, surfing is an asymmetrical sport. Most people only do it on one stance. They don't change. So what happens is then your nervous system becomes the pilot. It goes on autopilot, and the nervous system is telling it that this is here. And if you try and make an adjustment in that, the nervous system says, you don't know what you're talking about. This is the way you've done it all the time. So just changing, making that adjustment or that change feels foreign to the nervous system. And then it goes back to the brain and goes, I'm not going to argue with you, buddy, but this is stupid. And when we go to the opposing side, the least dominant side, there is no argument between the nervous system and the brain. And so the brain is giving instructions, and the nervous system's like, I don't really know how to do this. So it's a lot more receptive to being able to make things happen. And the greatest thing that in all the years, I don't think I've ever met anybody with as big an appetite to want to learn without any inhibitions anywhere in the world is Kai.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a huge asset, and it's a joy to work with, and it's really motivating because it makes me think of, okay, different ways to do things and how I work with you. We adjust these things and we say, okay, like we talked about closing the gap between feeling and fact. And so if we want to add something into the motor skill, we're going to start on the least dominant side, and telling somebody to go who's a regular foot, telling him to go switch or goofy, whatever you want to call it, for a week, and that's all you're going to do, is really debilitating for many because they're just like, they're argumentative, and then they get frustrated, and there's no learning takes place. But there will be a breakthrough if they can handle the stand-up paddle endurance, getting through that threshold of just absolute destruction. And then once you're in that zone of total destruction, it's like you're still flowing. It's like you get to a point where you're in so much discomfort and so much pain that it's just motion. You just keep going, and it's the same thing for the brain, that finally you're able to overpower that nervous system on the other side. And so when you go back to your dominant side, you have that feeling that you just acquired from, okay, this is a new one. Okay, yeah, wow, that's really different. I never imagined I could do that on this side. And now you go over, and now the brain is going to overpower that nervous system. And the argument is going to be a lot shorter.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No,
but
that makes sense.
It certainly does work for us.
Yeah, and I think a few years back, people might have seen Kai jumping around 360s. I don't know how many thousands of 360s you've had us do over the years, but just constantly, and they might say that's kind of silly, when you're surfing big waves, why are you doing this, low stance 360, we're with the board on. And then you figured out how to do the chop hop 360s, which kind of changed the sport of big wave towing, and all the best guys, that's what the standard is. So it definitely, that was a good example, I thought, of that sort of implementing. And you had been having us do it switch every time, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that's the most unique thing about when we train is we might be doing cleans or, heavy lifting sort of stuff, which is obviously making our knees and everything strong to handle the bumps, handle the movement underwater. But then we'll do something completely the opposite and hop on the mat and do standing backflips, jump from a high place and do a flip, or do 360s or 540s, or spin as fast as you can with keeping in a surf stance. And I think that sort of uniqueness, which is really tailored to what we're actually doing, versus most people go to the gym and they do gym exercises,
right?
But it's not directly correlated with the sport that they're doing. And what I've enjoyed about all of our gym sessions over the years is everything is correlated and aimed towards what we're going to do on the water. It's preparation for the water. It's exhaustion. So when you do go on the water on those training days, you're almost not at 100%, but then on the days that matter, when you have rest up into that point, it matters the most. Like
Right.
you have that fuel tank, but we're probably operating at like 65% most of the time.
Right.
You know, until those really important comps or those really important days when it's just like, okay, everything tightens up.
Right.
And you're like, wow, I feel so good.
Yeah.
A lot of times we pre-exhaust, meaning that you could pre-exhaust the muscle system, but you have a really fresh nervous system. So we can use microcurrent where you just sit there and your muscles just contract, and you look like a science experiment. You know, you're like, that is my leg. That's incredible. You know,
The power dot.
Yeah, you see striations and everything. You're like, oh my gosh. And then we might go into a totally exhausted situation with the muscle system, but the nervous system is totally fresh. It hasn't had to do anything. So then we might do coordination drills, eccentric loads with back tucks and different rotations, boards on, boards off. Same thing like Kai was talking about, doing cleans and then going right into an exercise. Most people are going to have those all separate. Okay, we're going to have an agility day. We're going to do strength and conditioning, endurance, and this is going to be the block. But I do it completely different.
Yeah. And like Kai was saying or alluding to earlier, it's the mental side is such a big part of the big waves, and that's what I feel like I've been training with you for 4 years, maybe now 3 or 4 years. And the confidence thing was the hardest thing for me to overcome. And I've found that doing the gym training and implementing the breath hold stuff as well into it and just getting comfortable with like the suffering of it. You know, it's because it is, so when you get smoked by a big wave, it is a lot of suffering. You know, your lungs are burning, the CO2, you don't know what's going on, you know. So it's that's been, I feel like, my biggest development through that type of training is just like slowly building that confidence. And it hasn't come in big chunks. It's like been really, really slow. I mean, maybe that's just how I develop as an athlete, but yeah, it's the confidence thing's everything, I feel like, for big waves.
Yeah, that it just comes back to that preparation, and each person is going to be different. Some people, they got to do, like gym work, like Kite calls it. Well, let's go to the gym. And they go, okay, but I want it to be, so when you get in the water, you have done so much breath hold stuff in the lifting. When you've totally on a flat tire, you have no oxygen, and now we got to do 8 reps. And then on top of that, we're going to blow it out even more with 3 standing back tucks in regular foot, goofy foot, regular foot, and then a 360. It's like, and then, you can do it. And then how that happens. A lot of people, all of a sudden, he did a forward flip. No, there was no all of a sudden. It's like there was a lot that goes into it. You're not just hucking it and hoping that it works out, because it usually ends in a disaster that way. So.
Yeah, and when you think of big wave training, the breath holding thing is huge. And how are you describing us training? That really, before I trained with you, I feel like my approach to it was very different. I feel like I was training more so as my focus was more so around like how free divers train, where you get your heart rate low, you calm the body down, go into the Zen state, and then you do your breath hold, and that's how people can reach those really long breath holds.
Right.
And how we do it is quite the opposite. You almost stress the body, put it in a really stressful state, lifting weights. Yeah. Usually where it's hard enough, and to take away your air. Yeah. Remember when we first started doing that, I looked at you, you're like, breathe all your air out and then do 10 reps. And I'm like, that does not sound safe. But just getting over, that's that mental block, where it's like, okay, I can function under a lot of stress and not have air, and you feel that CO2 build up, and you're just you're halfway through, and it feels like there's just no way, and pushing through that, and then you telling me to go straight into doing 2 backflips. Right. That's what gives you the confidence. And then when you're getting smoked by a big wave, it's a lot of time. I mean, sometimes wipeouts surprise you, but a lot of times it's like, okay, I'm really comfortable with this feeling of the chaos and the CO2 building up, and at least like with the inflation vest, we can just sort of just cruise and let the thing bring you up, versus in the gym, you're having to really focus on your technique and what you're doing. So that was like game changing for me, at least. I know you'd probably say the same. Yeah.
I concur.
I think the bringing the trampoline work in when we went with Trenton, doing it with him and with Matt. The air awareness stuff was really helpful. And then how we brought it home and started using boards and things like that. And then the jumping into the pit and all of that, and allows you to be in a controlled environment where you're not going to get hurt, where we went snowboarding and into the airbag, all those things. It doesn't take 3 months of it. It's just a couple of days to know, okay, I can do that. There's no consequence. And now there's all these just stepping stones to getting to be able to bring it to the water. And that's just, I love that progression and the ability to have options to be able to get it so that your learning expense isn't going to be at your body's expense as much. You're just throwing it on the 30-foot wave. I hope it works.
I think the bar has really been raised on training when it comes to big wave surfing. I mean, historically, it's just such a macho man sport, and these guys, all they do is just they're in the water and that's what they do, and they go out and ride these big waves. But now with the aerial acrobatics and everything, it's not quite enough to just show up and do it. Right. You really have to go through those things a lot and have it be muscle memory. Like this past fall, I was trying the 360s for the first time, and I was just like, that's an area I need a lot more work and getting the reps in the gym. And I really realized that. And that's why I want to go to the wave pool to really get that that specific backside rotation. I'm really, something's off with it. So it's just the reps of doing it. But that's just like where the bar is now. It's not enough to just go out there and toe in and go straight on a Jaws wave. It's like, you really got to be pushing it. And that
progression to go from a strap board that's probably pretty light, and then being able to have a winch that can pull you in fast enough so you can use your tow board. And imagine if you get it fast enough and big enough so you could use a Nazare board in a pool. That'd be this pretty fun.
This summer I want to just get whipped into chop and just do it over and over and over again. So it's just becomes second nature. I see him doing it. It's just like, it looks so easy. Yeah. But it's just, it's one of those things. You just got to grind it out until you get it.
And just be creative and just know that there's frustration is what you experience right before you break into that next level.
Yeah.
And so many people they try it 15 times and they're like, oh, well, I don't know what to do. Yeah. And on top of that, if you don't have feedback, like where you are in the rotation, where your body is, you think you're one place. And so having that, the comms that we can use to be able to give feedback instantly versus like go and surf for 20 minutes or an hour and you might catch 5 waves sometimes a lot more, but there's no feedback. And so you're getting repetition of something that may or may not be really what you want. And the ability to have communication there on the water, say, hey, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing that. That's very helpful.
Yeah, like the past swell, I remember I kicked out a wave and you told me, keep my arms more in, rotate the hips, and that little thing, I was able to be on a wave 30 seconds later, and being able to implement it was everything. So it's another thing we should touch on is that you're not just in the gym with us, you're literally on a ski right in the channel, right where we kick out after a wave, and having that sort of instant feedback is another thing that I've never seen before, at least in big wave surfing. Having a coach that
saves a lot of time.
Seriously, skip a lot of steps that way for sure.
Well, it's that the feedback, sometimes it's just like I'm just confirming, I might just confirm to Kai, you're on track, everything's good. And sometimes it might be just 1 or 2 words. Brevity really has a place. And like you said, there were 2 things. Just keep your arms in just a little bit and that's it. And then versus other coaches have a lot of feedback and there's a lot of dialogue and it's just like
you get lost.
The brain is turned off within 5 seconds of where this is going, and now you're just trying to figure out how to take that information, put it over there because you know what you want to do. And that comes from being an athlete, because if you haven't been an athlete and you haven't had feedback, you think you need to give Declaration of Independence and feedback, and there's a time and a place where you can have a conversation about it. And then there's also the value of the feedback. Is it going to be implemented or is it just going to be, I don't want to listen to you.
For sure. And I don't know if you had more questions, but the one sort of maybe final topic I'd like to ask you about is I just had my 28th birthday. Kai's into his 30s. So I feel like at this point in our careers, it's, and we had this conversation with Ian Walsh when he was on, is talking about longevity and wanting to do this sport, which can be really taxing on your body for a long time. You know, we want to be doing this through our 40s. Do you think there'll be a shift in our approach as we sort of get into our 30s a bit? And you know, I don't know. How do you see that? Because we haven't really talked about that much.
So as the athlete matures, the coaching, you know, the relationship between the coach and the athlete changes. And, you know, when I started with Kai, we'll just say it was a dictatorship. And then it was like a little bit of a partnership. Now it's more like a sounding board. Now it's like, well, what do you think? And I'm like, let's try this. You know, so it has to mature. I'm the one that has to change because I can't coach the same way for every single athlete and also at different stages. And as far as, you know, will you guys change? Yeah, as people get married, they have kids, all those things shift. And then what happens is the value of the training goes up exponentially because you don't have time to dilly-dally.
Right.
You know, it's like, hey, I got the kids. It's 5 o'clock. I'm gone. I'm out of here. Or it's like, I have until 2 o'clock. At 1:30, you got to tell me how much more time I got. And then we got to get this done. And then I got to go. And so you actually get more and more proficient in where you're putting your energy, and you're getting an equal and greater return because your intensity of focus is that much more laser beamed on what it is that you're trying to accomplish in that particular session.
Yeah. Do you feel that way now that you have kids and all that?
Yeah. I mean, and you don't know this until you have kids, but once you have kids, it gives you just such a clarity on things. And I'm like, oh, if I knew this, just what it's like being a dad 10 years ago, I would have been way better off. Just because it's like, you know, you have to show up for someone else who can't help themselves really, you know, with a little kid. And so in a way, growing up, you're just trying to learn how to help yourself before you can help others. But you know, it's more just, I would say, a mind state. It's not like anything's changed what I do on the water necessarily. It's just like a mind state of, okay, there's just no excuses. Like, I want to do this, I'm just going to do it. Whereas before, a lot of emotion can be attached to everything. Oh, like, can I do it? I don't know. Like, is it, you know, you just like, there's a lot of baggage. Yeah. And I think once you get married and you have kids, that baggage just kind of has to go away in order to be, you know, good at everything, be good at parenting, and then being really good at what you do to support your family. I think that's what it is. Like, there's just not as much baggage anymore. It's just really straight. And if you lose, say, a competition, and you just kind of look at it's not that it doesn't affect you. And I think that could be more nerve-wracking at first because you're like, wow, it doesn't sting the same way because you have this ability just to move on immediately. Like, okay, I already know what I got to change. Maybe I have to change my foil. Maybe I got to change, you know, I got to do more of this particular training. And I always found the hardest thing, while it's the biggest benefit for the performance itself, sometimes my hardest thing is dedicating time to just one thing because I want to do everything at once. Right. And it does help, I think, in certain scenarios where I only need, I think, 2 weeks of hardcore training in anything to be like right at the top I could be. But it's like doing a real clean training block. That's the hardest thing because things pop up. Yep. Life is here. And once you break that cycle, it's like almost another reset a little bit. So my goal is just to, try to have those really clean, big training blocks where I don't get distracted by too many other things. But luckily, you know, it's like, it's still a quest of learning.
Yeah. That appetite to learn has always been sort of an insatiable one for you. That's for sure.
I agree. I just love doing it. And now it's like, I would say, it's always like, I think as you get older, no matter what, you're like, gosh, I wish I knew what I know now back then. But if you're not saying that at this age, you're probably not learning enough because you're not growing, you know? And it's not changing fundamentally, but it's just like just rising up that ladder a little bit. And it's like, oh, if I would have known about shaping my own boards for these particular scenarios, or, you know, that I can handle it. You know, it's really like overcoming, can I handle a big wave wipeout? Yeah. Can I win? You know, those questions. Like once you kind of know, it's like, oh, just the fear of the unknown is the hardest. Once you get that experience, of course, but no better time than now. I mean, nowadays athletes are on the top of their game well into their 40s. Yep. So it's like, I think for us, we're in a good scenario that there's no reason why you can't be pushing 50 and still be like one of the top athletes in the world. Maybe there's like, one might argue, the physiological things, but luckily within the water sports that we do, the technique and experience may even outweigh certain scenarios. Maybe not an endurance or sprinting set, but like the fact of riding a wave, as long as you're willing to keep pushing yourself and learning new things that people have no interest in learning,
right? You
can kind of just keep that separation on everyone.
I think the exciting part, especially for you, Kai, is that to do as well as you've done without really having complete control over your equipment is really exciting, because now you know what the adjustment is, and nobody is more responsible than you, and you have no excuses. So it's just like, this is going to do this. Okay, that's a little too much. I can do that, and that's a really unique place to be. It's sort of like I mentioned a couple of times before, sort of like how Nicky Lauda was. He was going with the team and taking the screws out and doing, when you watch the movie and everything, and how detail-oriented he was, but how involved he was, whereas other are sort of driving by the seat of their pants. Literally, it's like it's all feeling and stuff, and then learning how all of that stuff affects, whether it's how the fins are set and staggered and angled and boxes and placement and rocker and midpoint and all those things, and having that, it's just like a whole newfound appetite to want to learn and get improved. And it's always like a springboard to, I can do this, I can do that, and you get really excited about it. And you're the benefactor of all that stuff.
Oh yeah, no, I can just sit back a little bit and just, that's what you were saying about the toe boards. I was like, he's developing them, and this, it's really scary to go try something new, especially in big waves, and just waiting for him to get it to the point where it's like, oh, it's perfect, and then okay, give me one now, and then it's just, I don't have to go through all that. So it's nice.
And we have maybe a mini jaw swell coming up, possibly, but it's pretty rad because that next board is going to be ready. So the more boards, I think I've done 4 or 5 toe boards this winter alone, and it started with like some incremental adjustments, big jump and incremental, and now it's another massive jump. So it gets me excited for the next season. And before, I think in big waves, it was, well, thank goodness that's over.
Yeah.
And then it was like, oh, it's a long summer. And then as summer creeps to an end, it's like, oh no, winter's coming. Now it's the opposite. It's like, I can't believe winter's over. And then it's like, oh, it's going to be such a long summer. And then the anticipation, excitement for winter so we can surf Pe'ahi jaws again. It's, but it's just, that's how it is.
Our playground's pretty special, though, that's for sure.
We're lucky.
Yeah. Every time we're up there, it's especially because our crew is always the last people standing. It's just got to pinch yourself a little bit.
Dark to dark.
Yeah.
I always just equate that, though, right? It's like, gosh, you have only so many opportunities. Like, have all summer to rest.
Yeah.
Why not just like burn out right now? Just burn out on this swell, and you can just rest the rest of the summer. Like, at least, because you never know when the next swell is. I mean,
right.
I would say throughout the whole winter, I treat it as this could be the last swell, and it's December still, but you just don't know. I mean, we've seen it where it doesn't even break.
I think a lot of people have the mindset, and I've been guilty of this in my early years out there, is that you get a couple good waves and you're like, okay, I got away with it. Let me just go home. I'm safe. It takes a lot to be like, you get a lot of good waves and be like, okay, I'm still going to push it. I'm getting tired, but the waves are still good. I should stay out. That's a hard, I think the only way I would have gotten over that is just him leading by example a little bit and being like, okay, you can keep pushing it. Your body is capable of it, but that's a really common mindset. People are like, just get me out of here. I got my wave.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say it's pretty much like a 2-hour window where people are there. And a lot of times those 2-hour windows, they're just like a buoy, just sitting on a ski or just sitting on their board, and they'll cherry pick and they'll maybe get 2 waves. And then it's all ours.
Yeah.
Like last one was just us, right?
Every year I think, oh, there's no way this will ever happen again. Like where you'll get a solo session out there. And, then you end up getting more sessions like that, and you can't like expect them, but you do feel grateful when they do happen. So that's like especially in those random swells, and kind of preferable for it to be really windy because that's a deterring factor for most to travel around the world,
Yeah, no one wants to be in the wind out there. That's for sure.
Well, that's the great thing. When we go up there, there's multi-sports.
Right.
Pick your poison, It's like there's just no excuse really. You should be out there until it's like no longer even rideable.
Right. I mean, last time you went foil left and got a little longer ride than one that we expected.
Oh, for sure. No, it's just it's all about having the right equipment at the right time. But that speaking on all that, I think another motivating factor is just hoping that one of my daughters like really likes what I do too.
Yeah.
And I can just like obviously not flood them with information, but I can just they can cut how many steps. Not for any other reason than it feels, when you can be improving at such a fast rate, that's when it's really, really fun.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh my gosh, now I can make the perfect boards for whatever they need.
Yeah.
And then, send them up to Scott's with me. I'll be up there working out with them. And then,
that'll be the 10-year-old in the room.
Yeah, they'll break Kai's record. Yeah.
I think one of them might be interested. We'll see.
I'm pretty darn sure.
One of them, at least one out of the three, will be into it. Maybe all of them, but that's another motivating factor to make the best boards I can so that they can have the best equipment later on.
You may be pretty busy for quite a while, even after we're done.
Well, we're not going anywhere. So.
Scott has all daughters too, so it'll be like a full thing again where he's training the daughters, And
then right when you think you're done, like my kids are going to come up and want sweet. Well, thanks, Scott. That was fun talking to you, and we'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning. So
great.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks, Scott. See you guys.
See ya.